Hello everybody, and a warm welcome to the GESIS series, both here in Mannheim and Cologne as well as online. It is my great pleasure to welcome Ludger Woessmann to Mannheim today. He's Professor of Economics at LMU, University of Munich, and Director of the Ifo Center for the Economics of Education. He has very widely published on the quality of education and its impact on economic development and performance. It is also this work is widely cited, and we will get a glimpse at some of this work in this presentation, but this will go beyond this area of research and also introduce the new Ifo Education Survey. And I think we're all at GESIS very much interested in hearing more about this specific survey project. And so without much further ado, from Cologne and tough but fair, after yesterday evening, to the lecture series. Warm welcome, and we're looking forward to questions and discussions after the talk.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. Let's see how tough that will be. So what I want to talk about, I mean, where I basically come from, as you already indicated, is the classical economics of education, question of how education is related to economic prosperity. What we usually like to call the returns to education, but with a special focus that is really not just education in terms of how long you've been in the education system, but the quality in terms of the competencies that you've actually learned that is most relevant for economic outcomes. And that's actually why economists get more and more interested in topics of education, because at the end of the day, it's maybe the most important predictor both of macroeconomic performance and microeconomic performance. And I'll give you a little glimpse of that in a minute. But then, of course, you only get these returns if you have policies that make sure that your education system is of high quality. And so this gives rise to interesting question about, like, why do we have the policies that we have, and maybe why do sometimes don't we get the relevant reforms that would improve the quality of education. And that's something that in economics we like to call the political economy, which basically is just the idea that there's a political process, that politicians have to be elected and want to be re-elected, and so it's a big question on which policies they can implement or not. So maybe even if they themselves are convinced that a certain reform would be important, or maybe like US researchers have told them this is a reform that would actually help children from poor socioeconomic backgrounds getting a better education, maybe they cannot implement it because of political pressures, because either like public opinion is just different, they will not get a majority for it, or because of specific interest groups have a lot of power and make sure and they have an interest that's different from this general interest. And so to get into this general idea, we set up a project at Ifo Institute, which I mostly want to talk about today. So this has two parts. The first one will be much briefer than it should be, but just gives you like just 2 slides of basic associations of education quality with economic prosperity at the macro level and at the micro level, where the micro level is exactly the PIAAC data that GESIS is of course most acquainted with. And then we want to get into this question about what are education policies that the German public, the German population likes, where would they be open to reform and where wouldn't they be open to reform, and also the question about whether this partly has to do with specific information that they have or don't have, and I will get to that in a minute. And this is what I mostly want to focus about today, in particular because I hope to get a lot of feedback from you, because this is about a specific opinion survey, and we've already profited here a lot from GESIS, and probably know that I will talk about it. You will have many more ideas that I can profit from. Okay, so the basic motivation in a sense then is economic relevance of education, and in our most recent publication on this, we actually had a whole book out here together with Eric Heliushek. We like to call this knowledge capital. The basic idea is that the education that people have in terms of what they actually capabilities that they have, the competencies, or in brief, as a general term for this, the knowledge, is a relevant production factor, because like the more knowledge you have, the more productive you can be, but also the more likely you get new ideas you can develop, bring in innovations that actually lift the economy to a higher level, to a more productive level. And so there's a huge literature trying to understand differences in economic growth rates across countries, long-run economic growth rates, not just like business cycle fluctuations, but in the very long run. Why do some countries get much richer and others hardly get richer at all? And so one idea there is, it has to do with the education of the people. The literature for a long while has tried to measure education by the average years of schooling that people have spent in the education system. And that is, of course, somewhat limited perspective. I mean, it's data-driven is what you have, but on the other hand, like a year of schooling in Japan is probably not the same as a year of schooling in Ghana. And that was basically the main motivation for how we came in here and tried to say, let's see, there's one way where we can kind of straightforwardly try to measure a bit more than that by taking these international student achievement tests. So you all know PISA, but actually since the 1960s there have been, at an irregular intervals, international student achievement tests in math and science. And what we basically have done is bring all of these tests together from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, try to put them on a common scale, and so get an average measure of the quality of the education that the people in different countries have. And if you run a regression of your long-run growth rate of the test on these test scores, like the average test scores in these earlier installments of PISA predecessor studies, if you will, this is what you get. So here's the long-run rate of economic growth, so the growth rate of the GDP per capita of a country. In this case here from 1960 to 2000, you could go longer, do this to 2009, would look kind of very similar. The point is that, like with a big financial recession in 2008, it's a bit of a mess, like to get your data influenced by that. So we rather stick before any bubbles built up before that reform. But actually, like if you draw the picture for 2009, it looks the same. But it's a very long-run perspective. Average annual growth rate over 40 years, and this is the test score that I talked about, the average test score in these old tests. And both sides take out the effect of the initial level of GDP per capita. What you generally see is that countries that were initially poorer can catch up to the richer countries, so you want to control for that, and this is basically what this picture does. It's like an added variable plot of such a regression. And what you see is like an extremely strong association, to the extent that countries that have been performing very well on these tests are exactly the countries that have high growth rates, and the other way around. Countries with low performance on the math and science tests are countries like that have very low long-run growth rates. Now this is just like an association that you see. We've done a lot of research that actually has kind of at least convinced us that most of what we see here is actually a causal effect of better education of the people or long-run growth rates. If you want to know more about that, you would have to read that book. But at least you get a general idea of the picture here. Germany is pretty much on the line. I've highlighted like different groups of countries a little bit in terms of colors, which is kind of interesting. The yellow ones are Latin American countries, the green ones are East Asian countries, and what you see is like the Latin American countries like have hardly developed over these 40 years. Like the East Asian countries, most of them have like developed very strongly, and you can see that it's directly related to their long-run growth performance. If you would do the same picture, not with test scores, but with years of schooling, you would not be able at all to account for the differences in growth rate between these two regions, because they have all the same length of schooling on average. But kind of with this model, it's totally explained. And even within the groups, you could see like the green dots also align very well along this regression line, the yellow ones as well, and the blue ones, which are all other countries as well. Like overall, if you just got a regression of growth rate on initial GDP and years of schooling, the R squared of such a model is about 1/4, so 1/4 of the long run variation in growth rate is accounted for by the model. If you add the test scores, it's more than 3/4. So you can really, like, statistically account for a majority of online growth rates with the test scores. So this is one indication of why this may be very relevant to what, like, ultimately economists want to understand, why some countries get rich and others remain poor. A second piece of evidence is at the individual level. So this was macroeconomic. Here we go at the micro level. And so there, the PIAAC study is, of course, a very nice feature where you have competency measures for the individual at the individual level, and you observe their wages in the labor market while they're in the labor market. And so we've done this study that just tries to, like, take as a dependent variable the individual income of these individuals, and what we, like, generally like to call the Mincer equation is, like, that tries to explain these differences in usually log earnings by differences in years of schooling and usually in work experience, and you can add a few more variables if you want. And so what we basically just did here is extend this and take the years of schooling, but take the PIAAC measure of competencies as our measure of the skills of the population. This is a picture on the numeracy scores. Actually, the others look kind of similar. And what you basically see is that in each country that participated in PIAAC, we see a very strong and statistically highly significant association between the skills of the population and their earnings. On average across the countries, it's about 80% higher earnings if you increase your numeracy scores by 1 standard deviation. So, what is a standard deviation is, of course, always a bit hard to interpret, but basically, like, the way that PIAAC defines the scale is actually in terms of, like, 5 competency levels that are in terms of standard deviations, I think. So basically, each step on these 5-step scale would give you 80% higher earnings. And Germany is actually among the countries where this association between competencies and wages is strongest. Here we have a 23.5% increase in wages per standard deviation. The largest number is in the US with 28%. But even in Sweden, which is, like, has much lower returns to these skills on the labor market, it's still 12% higher earnings per each standard deviation. It's still a clear and strong association there. Like in Germany, that I think means, like, if at the mean, if you would increase your, like, if you get 1 step in this 5-step scale in terms of competencies, that gives you, I think, 650 euros per month higher earnings. So it's a substantial difference. So you see it here, there. We also there have, at least for the US sample, some sort of an analysis where we try to get into more exogenous variation in skills and get more towards causality. And if anything, those estimates get even larger there. But that's, of course, somewhat of an open question. It's first of all an association, but it tells you that if you want to understand labor market performance of individuals, it seems that skills or competencies are very important. Okay, this was my main motivation as an education economist, and I wanted to give you a quick idea of that as well. But let me now take the rest of my time talking about this education survey that I introduced. We call it in Germany the Ifo Bildungsbarometer. It's part of a Leibniz project, actually, funded under this competitive procedure. That's called the Political Economy of Education Policies, Insights from a Public Opinion Survey. We cooperate in here with a group of political scientists at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and they have already done a similar type of survey for several years in the US, and we now have, actually, in the first year we strongly coordinated many questions with them, and so we can actually compare US and Germany. If you're interested in that, there's also a paper out on that. But I stick with the German results here. It is, for what it's worth, a representative survey of the German adult population, so target population is age 18 plus, is fully computer-based. 80% is from a general online panel, and to get those people who are not online who don't have internet access at home, we have in addition personal interviews just of people who don't have internet access at home. And so we basically combine these two things to get something that's hopefully representative of the full population. This whole thing is conducted by TNS Infratest. The first wave that we have was April to July 2014, the second one in May 2015, and we're going to have a third one, as we know, and Ms. Ramstedt already know, we're like in the final stages of getting the questionnaire done for that as well. And we hope a little bit actually that we can go on maybe at a reduced scale even in the future with doing some more about this, because this has become quite interesting, I think. Each of these two waves has some 4,000 observations, and which basically means it's pretty large, and just as a rule of thumb, because I'm not going to show you any confidence intervals or stuff like that in here, but it's actually for most of what you're going to see, the 95% confidence interval will be between 1% and 1.5 percentage points on these like numbers that I show you. We're going to have some things where we're going to have splits, and there's actually a bit larger, like probably between 2 and 3 percentage points. So the point is, like, just quantitatively or politically, if the difference between two supports for something is 2 or 3 percentage points, it's probably not that big, it's not that relevant, but anything that's like 5 percentage points, we would have power to detect. So that's actually, I think, quite nice, and nice to have this big sample. Why did we have this big sample? Because like often people say like we need 1,000 people to get closer to representativeness for the German population. Well, the main reason is the one most specific feature of what we're doing, and this is that we've introduced a number of survey experiments into the survey. So for specific questions, a random subgroup of participants would be provided with a certain information, for example, on things like the returns to education that we just talked about, or cost of education, or anything else. You're going to see that in a minute. And then they're going to answer the same opinion question. We basically want to see whether the responses of people on this kind of a survey are malleable, could be shifted by specific information, or whether it's actually pretty stable. I mean, the ultimate idea is to get an idea of which types of information may affect people's outcomes, which could give you an indication of if you're a politician who want to do a reform. Maybe this is specific information that you've got to provide the public with in order to increase acceptance of such a reform. And that's the main point. And so we're going to have up to 4 splits, but then in each split we still have 1,000 observations, which is a decent feature. Okay. If you've got any direct questions on this here, please interrupt me at any time, because then I want to be sure that the basic structure is clear.
Just for information, the samples are independent samples in each wave, so you always run new samples.
Yes and no. So basically, we would have loved to have a real panel, but that would have been much too expensive, basically. That's the main reason why we don't have it. But we did ask TNS to basically recontact anybody they contacted in the first wave, in the second wave, and just see how far you get there. And it's actually, I think we have, oh no, I don't want to say wrong things. I think we have something like 1,300 or 1,700. I should know that. Around this order of magnitude recontacts. So for those, we actually, it's not a representative sample of answered again, but we can actually link some of the, like, third of the sample roughly over the 2 years. And let's see how many we kind of get this year. So these will only be the online people, so these are totally independently drawn samples each time. But in there, so we have some panel structure, but it's not built like this, and so it's clearly not a representative panel over time. Okay, let me, I just give you some of the what I think are some of the interesting questions and results of what we did there, and it gives you a broad overview of what we've done. So let's just start off with like a question where we basically asked about like how important are topics in school and education policy for your personal voting decision at the state elections, where this is relevant in Germany, just to get an idea of how this looks like. And there, about a quarter says it's very important, half say it's rather important, and then another bit more than a quarter says it's rather or not at all important to them. So it seems something that is politically relevant. This also allows us then in deeper analysis, I'm not going to go into this here, but like whenever we want to analyze specific questions, we can then distinguish between those who are actually not very much interested in education and those who are more interested and where it's probably more relevant for their voting behavior. But in general, it seems to be something that maybe politicians may care about. And then let me summarize what we found in this. So this is all from the second wave, from the 2015 survey, in terms of how open Germans are to reforms in the education area. And we were kind of surprised that there's actually a lot of things where the majority of Germans favor something that would be a big difference from the current system. So basically they're very open to reform. And I'm going to give you these 10 examples of what we found there. So we try to go through the whole education life cycle in our survey. There is probably a strong emphasis on the school level, but we do try to have questions from preschool to adult education in there. And so one question, for example, is basically, I'm going to have the short version here only. I mean, I have the German originals here, but I was actually too lazy to translate the whole slides as well, so I hope that's fine for everybody. So should we basically ask whether kindergarten, preschool should be free of charge, funded by the state from tax money, so that's explicitly in there, for all children starting from the age of 4. So right now that is not the case, but there's a very strong majority in favor of this, and this is the usual setup on how we give them a 5-point scale. They are very much in favor, rather in favor, neither favor nor opposed, rather opposed, very much opposed. And you see that actually here it's like 3/4 would easily be more in favor of this policy. Here is the first example of such an experiment. It's actually very like direction-oriented intervention that we usually don't do too often, but it has a specific case actually in a deeper study that we want to do. So part of the respondents first got the sentence that like many studies show that education expenditures, in particular in the early childhood education, have positive effects on later education, on social behavior, and on incomes of the children. So just give them the idea of what I think many different education disciplines have shown by now, that actually early intervention can be very important for longer outcomes. You just give them that and then ask them the same question, and that makes quite a difference. I mean, for something that already has a lot of support, but actually it's like, actually even have more than 50% who are very much in favor, and like only a very small group who are not in favor of this policy. So you can see that people do respond to this specific sentence that's stressed in the opinion survey there. I mean, what that ultimately means in terms of like for policies is probably a bit artificial to translate that. But it seems like if you would motivate this kind of a policy proposal with the importance of these interventions for longer run outcomes, that could help. It also tells you that most people are not that aware of these type of information, I guess. Okay, number 2, also on preschools, we basically asked them whether it would make sense to have national, so German-wide standards for the quality in preschool in terms of like how large the groups could be, or what the training of the preschool teachers should have. And like the vast majority, 86%, in favor of that. I mean, this is a very simple general question, but I was still a bit surprised how there's hardly anybody against it. And that's a bit of a recurrent theme, is actually that most Germans do favor things that are like give more comparability or more unity as well at the national level in education. You see that very strongly. Third question that we asked was at that time actually a very hot topic, the Betreuungsgeld, so the childcare subsidy that parents get on top of your of the general Kindergeld, if and only if they don't enroll their children in kindergarten, and we just ask them, like, are you in favor or against this type of Betreuungsgeld? And you see that actually there's a strong majority against Betreuungsgeld. A third of the people are in favor. Actually, shortly afterwards, there was this ruling of the Constitutional Court that actually ruled this unlawful based on very different reasons. But you would see actually that this policy actually never had a majority. Actually, not even in Bavaria. It's now still pretty instituted. Okay, let's move to the school sector. We basically, like, we tell them that actually in most states, where you live defines on which school you can go to, the Sprengelpflicht in German, and we basically ask, like, should parents be allowed to choose primary schools freely? And about two-thirds are in favor of such more choice among primary schools. Then a question that is of a lot of interest in the public discussion, I guess, is that, well, we in Germany have mostly this like half-day school system that stops before lunch, and should we like change overall to a whole-day system? And this really asks that, like, it's clear that everybody, all children, have to stay in school for the afternoon. We actually had a similar question in the first year, and we tried around a little bit with like whether they have to or are allowed to and stuff, but we actually saw that there's very strong support for this policy. And so this year we tried to understand better what people have in mind and how long this should be. So we basically gave them the same question. In the first question, they were asked, like, where all kids have to stay in school until until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And you see that 61% are in favor of a whole day system where everybody has to stay in school, and only 29% are opposed. Then another random split, so another one of these experimental splits, got the same question, just which says 16 rather than 15 o'clock, so 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And you still see a majority. It's reduced a little bit, but still 56% are in favor and 36% are opposed. And the third group got the same thing until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And there actually it's still a small plurality that's in favor of whole day school system, but it's more like a tie between those in favor and those opposed. So actually, and it actually declines even till 5 o'clock. So if you would have thought that maybe some parents like in particular something that's until 5 o'clock because then both can work, that doesn't seem to be the most like majority opinion. Okay, then we asked about national comparative tests in school. So we basically told them, are you in favor or opposed that certain Klassenarbeiten in German and math in specific grades, for example, 3rd, 7th, and 10th grade, would be substituted by a German-wide uniform comparative test that actually enters the school grade, the Schulnote of the student. So we're quite specific about that. And more than 2/3 are actually in favor of that. They would be in favor of this comparative test that's like the same test in all of Germany. We asked a similar question about the exit exams. So actually in the first year, and actually others have shown that before, there's a strong support for centralized exit exams at the Abitur level. This year we actually try to ask that as well for the other different degrees. So we asked that, like, should there be a national exit exams for the Hauptschulabschluss, for the Realschulabschluss, and for the Abitur, and in each case you've got like more than 80% in favor of this. So people do want to have a national exam system here. And it's also, we asked like about the role of the federal government in general by asking about the Kooperationsverbot. So this ruling that actually the federal government is not even allowed to cooperate with the states in terms of funding or anything else at the school level. We had the same thing for the university level. That actually was changed in the constitution at the end of 2014. So that was ended at the university level. We basically asked them, should that also be ended at the school level? And about 60% are in favor terminating this, basically saying this federal government should have a role in the school system. We actually also asked a different, I don't want to go into this here now, but about the funding of schools, and there they would ask for a much larger role of the federal government as well. We asked a little bit about, not much, but about apprenticeships. We basically asked one specific proposal that whether the state should actually basically subsidize businesses if they offer an apprenticeship place for students who have been searching without success for an apprenticeship for more than a year. So the idea is that actually around 70% of each cohort remains without an apprenticeship, and that's very relevant in the labor market. What can we do? And so one proposal would be actually, the government puts in money there. 2/3 of the response in favor of such a policy. And the final one on here is another one where we actually invested a lot into the survey experiments. At the university level, and it's about the question whether there should be tuition fees in Germany or not. So you know the background. There have been for a while tuition fees of 500 euros per semester, and that actually all states have them again. And the general feeling was that the vast majority of Germans hate tuition fees and want to do away with it. We basically want to ask whether that's the case. So we simply asked, are you in favor or oppose against the fact that students who study at a German university should pay part of the costs by tuition fees? That's a general open question. If you ask it just like that, you basically see a tie. 44% are actually in favor and 46% are opposed. We were very surprised by that, by the media attention that, if I remember, 2 years ago, tuition fees were abolished in the area, the public discussion about that was feeling like 90% of the people hate tuition fees. That's my interpretation is that that's strongly driven by interest groups who really want to do away with them. Of course, students hate tuition fees, and so and they have a loud voice in this discussion. And if you just ask the public in general, it's kind of a tie. Then one treatment we did here is inform people about how much people who went to university later on the labor market compared to other people. So basically what we said, the sentence reads as follows. Persons who finished university studies on average earn 2,450 euro net per month. That's public statistics in Germany. People who got an apprenticeship, so a vocational degree, earn 1,850 euros, so quite a bit less. And people without an apprenticeship earn about 1,400 euros. And then they get the same question. So it just informs them about the average earnings of people who went to university compared to others. This has a substantial effect on raising support for tuition fees. Now we actually have 50% in favor and 38% opposed. This is one information. And the third treatment group that we have does something different. It doesn't ask the question this way, but tells them there are other countries in the world where tuition fees have to be paid only after you finished university, when you already earn income in the labor market, and they only have to be paid if your income is above a certain threshold. And then we ask the question: would you favor or oppose introducing this type of a tuition fee in Germany? And we were very surprised to see that actually then about 60% are in favor and only 30% are opposed. So this is kind of this income contingent tuition fee system like Australia has been having for a long while now. New Zealand has it as well. England has it to some extent. We don't refer to these countries, but we just say this is like an alternative system. Would you be in favor or opposed? And if you just ask for this kind of delayed, deferred income contingent type of tuition fees, 59% of Germans would favor. Actually, this is, I think I went through all this from the paper. So this is one of the things where we try to go somewhat deeper and run regressions and try to understand better what's going on there. And so you basically see your support for tuition fees if you just combine the upper two parts of the scale in terms of support. Those people who randomly got this information about the relative earnings are 6% more likely to be in favor of tuition fees, and that's actually carried through to putting in a lot of controls like age, income, gender, education, and quite a few additional things. Well, given that it's a random treatment, that shouldn't change, and it doesn't. And if you phrase it in terms of income contingent fees rather than standard fees, that increases the support by 15%, and you see similar drops in the opposition against tuition fees. In the first wave, we had a very, the same question. The treatment was a different, it was about relative earnings rather than absolute earnings. I don't go into that. The point is actually we get exactly the same type of a treatment effect there. We did two other things actually in the first year. So one was, we've got the control group, we've got the group that was informed about relative earnings of university graduates. A third group was informed that the average, that the government currently spends around 8,400 euro per year per student at a university, and then got the question. So you are informed of public costs that didn't have a significant effect on the expressed opinions. And the fourth group got information about the relative access of children from academic backgrounds and non-academic backgrounds. So basically, they were like 75% of children from academic families go to university themselves, only 25% of children from non-academic parents go to university, and this was actually already the case before any tuition fees in Germany. That was the information they got. Also didn't have an effect on opinion. So here's a case where it's not that everything that you inform people about has an effect on their expressed opinions. Actually, I showed you the things where we found relevant differences, like the earnings information here, but there are other treatments where that actually don't shift opinions at all. I've already run out of time, big time. An additional thing that we did here is we actually, much earlier in the questionnaire, asked them about what they guess how much university graduates earn relative to non-university graduates. So we basically asked them about this information that we later provide from the random subgroup of them. And now we differentiate the treatment effect between those who had about the correct guess and those who had an incorrect guess, and then those who overestimated compared to underestimated. And basically what we see is those who initially had the correct belief about the level of relative earnings, the information doesn't have any effect on their expressed opinion. And it's really only the group that had an incorrect belief and actually underestimated, because this is a little bit bad how I put that up, but if you add these two, the treatment effect for those who overestimated, so it's also close to zero, but only the ones who underestimated the earnings differences when they were told, actually, in fact, they earn much more, are much more in favor of tuition fees. This already gives you a little bit of an idea that this is not pure priming effect, but there's a little bit of information included, because those who were well informed actually didn't get any treatment effect. We did one step more. I didn't bring the slide, I think. Namely, we also asked them how sure they are about this initial belief. And you can actually see that the treatment effect comes nearly completely through the fact of change, informing people who had very strong, who were pretty sure about something that was pretty wrong. So you don't see strong effects for those who were kind of unsure, but those who were pretty sure but actually had thought that the earnings difference later are much lower, for them you got the big effect. Okay, I've run totally out of time. These were the 10 examples of where people do in fact like features of the school system or of education policies that are different from what we currently have. I'm going to skip a few more things. I just want to say a few final things to give you an idea of other things that we've done. In the second round, we did oversample parents. So we, altogether among these 4,000, then had, I think, 1,700 and something parents of school-age children in the sample. Of course, we wanted to see whether parents have different views from the population at large or not. And the bottom line is we found very small and very small differences, basically. There are a few instances where you do see somewhat of a difference, like we asked people about whether preschool teachers should have a university degree or not, and there you can see that parents are somewhat more in favor of it. Or we asked about like these comparative tests, parents are a little bit less in favor of that. Or we asked about public funding for private schools, parents are a little bit more in favor of that, but these are about the three pictures where you do see somewhat of differences, and even there it's not, I mean, it's still that the vast majority is in favor here. I mean, there's very few real differences. We were surprised how similar that is actually throughout the board. For most things, you don't see any significant difference between parents and non-parents. We did treat people about informing them about party positions on specific policies, and you can see in some instances that actually that changed people's views as well. For example, those who are like basically CDU, CSU, like the conservative parties were the only that were in favor of Betreuungsgeld. Those who later in the survey say they in general favor CDU, CSU, in general actually without any treatment have very similar opinions on Betreuungsgeld than the other people who support the other parties. If you tell them that actually, well, CDU, CSU is in favor of Betreuungsgeld, they are no much more likely to also be in favor. So there are like, it's probably, you could argue this type of heuristic where people actually, if they don't have very strong views on specific policies here, like try to get some information signals anchored from somewhere, and so if they say, okay, if the party that I generally like is against it, I should probably be against it. What? Okay, let me skip. There's a bit more on the first survey. Let me close with like one thing from the first survey. So we asked people in generally, should public expenditure on schools in Germany increase, stay the same, or decrease? If you just ask it like that, like big majority is in favor of increases. If you inform them that actually current levels of public spending are 6,400 euro per student, that decreases support for increased spending quite a bit, like pretty strong treatment effect. And the third leg just got the additional information, or basically we asked like, should taxes be increased to finance public spending for schools? Because I mean, public spending has to come from somewhere, and at the end of the day it will have to come from taxes. If you just refer to that, like if you compare it to here, like everybody's about should stay the same. So Germans don't like higher taxes. But it's kind of, you can, so this is an example where this type of a framing and like referring to how much the current level of spending is and referring to the fact that actually public spending has to be financed by taxes at the end of the day does make quite a big of a difference here. So I mean, this type of a general survey statement is probably not very externally valid. Okay, I skipped the rest. Bottom line is that we do see quite a few areas where Germans are strongly in favor of reforms. And it's not just that actually they are always in favor of more public spending. Like we did see this for early education, but we also saw, for example, that actually once informed, for example, they are actually in favor of tuition fees at universities. So it's not just like people just think about how it's got to come from somewhere and we are in favor of more of it. And we see a general support for more national comparability in the education system and more national quality assurance. Few differences between parents and the rest of the population. The different types of the information that we provided, some of them actually can have quite an effect on expressed opinions in here. Often depends on the specific design of the reform, just like it's whole day schooling at 3, 4, or 5 o'clock, or like tuition fees to be paid now or to be paid later makes quite a big difference. We did invest a lot in the second year of providing people with regionalized information. So kind of somewhere in the middle or early on in the survey, we asked them about their postcode, Postleitzahl, and then based on that information, We told them at later stages, for example, what is the share of people reaching an Abitur in their county, and partly we even informed them about what the distribution of this is in the country, and like here's your county, and then asked about like whether they're in favor or against increasing people making the Abitur, these type of things. We did several things. None of that had ever any impact. It's very disappointing. So these regionalized information, which we thought could have quite an impact, like it's actually very hard to implement, we didn't find anything there. Okay, we did like these pictures that you saw, these type of general results. We have actually published in two simple reports in the Ifo Schnelldienst that give all the main results, and we are like still working on a lot of deeper analysis that hopefully come out as papers for referee journals. Sorry to have taken too long, but I hope to get more feedback now.
Comments, questions? Who wants to make a start?
Thank you very much. So your sample apparently seems to be willing to rewrite the German constitution in important parts. Now, one important hint that you hinted at yourself is that the politically active population might differ from the representative population. Do you have any idea of whether or how many in your sample are actually politically active, and to what degree that might alter the findings or the results?
Yeah, we did. That's a very relevant point. In the second wave, we did ask them whether, like, how often they go voting, how often they go to the polls, like nearly every time, usually hardly ever, this type of thing. And so we can differentiate good by that. We haven't done a like totally thorough analysis of how the different things differ by this or not. I remember that for some things like tuition fees, actually that didn't make much of a difference. Those who regularly go voting and those not. But I mean, we would be able to, for each of these to go into that. But I don't have all the answers in my head. But that's I mean, this is a very relevant question if you think about political economy. It's only those who actually are politically go voting who should be relevant for partisan politics.
I have several questions. Most of them stem from my more methodological background. So the first issue is the composition of the sample. So yeah, in the sample, as you outlined, there is hardly a new sample, so a not interviewed before sample within your barometer, and then there is a panel sample, about 1/4 of them or 1/3 of them. Have you done analysis to what degree the pre-information on your study has an impact on the responses? Would be one question for the next wave. And the other question would be more proactive. Did you use this? Talking about the effect of former knowledge about people. You could use that you know for people what they reported last year was their impression of reforms, or what party they prefer, etc. So you have a lot of knowledge about them, which you could use in an online interview.
Okay. So that's another area where we can and hopefully will do much more analysis. For example, in the terms of tuition fees, we have started to look into that and see, for example, and see whether like the information that you got in the first year actually does have an effect on what you say in the next year. Which for me would be a bit surprising. Actually, I'm not so strongly believing in these type of information treatment effects. It's basically one little sentence like on a screen that you probably have forgotten 5 screens later, maybe. Who knows? But we actually did see but these get like only marginally statistically significant. We did see effects of this earnings information in 2014 on responses in 2015, but that also then actually we want to do more specification checks there. I mean, ultimately, the easiest way to do it is to do it in just the control group in the second year, because otherwise you get all these different treatments in the different years, and but then your samples of course not that big. So we started to try to analyze a little bit of that, but so like much more could be done there. We haven't used it as in sense of like using their prior responses as a treatment in the next year. That would be like an interesting aspect as well. But I mean, given you could only do that for those who are like re-surveyed, who would only be part of the survey, that might be interesting and specific question we haven't like thought about that yet.
Can I continue, or well, we have 9 more minutes, so maybe we can see whether there's other questions also, maybe from people who are watching at home. No? Okay. Because I would have a couple, but then if nobody else says that, give you another time maybe.
Okay. Perhaps I just rush through my questions and you summarize them. One question was your comparison between the parents and the rest of the population. Did you control what proportion of the rest of the population in your sample was are parents? Because if there are 80% parents, I would not expect that you find huge differences. Then your really fascinating experimental data on changing views on for example, on the Betreuungsgeld, according to what party is in favor of that and that. Could also be vice versa. That would be also interesting to check. That if you report you are in favor of the CDU, then you hear that the party is in favor of something you don't like, that you then decide not to like the CDU anymore. Yeah, I mean, this would be an informed decision. That you say, well, then I don't vote for this party because they will implement something that I don't want.
That's right, yeah.
Generally, I would be interested in to what degree the data is available, publicly available. The most crucial question was, all your questions were formulated in a way that you agreed to something. And I think for all the data that you reported, you found that more than 50% agreed. Yeah? I do a lot of research on acquiescence, so on agreeing to an item without independent on the item content. So you interpret the data as true scores, and there might be. So my point would be that there can be a methodological effect in it, and it would be interesting to turn one in your upcoming way to turn one statement vice versa. So that you can see if you have 50% that way and that way, if the true score agreeing, the reversal would be as high as otherwise.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good idea. We haven't.
No, it's good. I just want to give you some time to respond to some of the points questions.
I like the last idea. We haven't done that yet. I mean, but it seems that everybody agrees to all things just because I picked all the things that are interesting because people are in favor of reform. That was like, I should have, like usually actually I would have started with 2 or 3 items where you see that actually lots of things people don't agree to. For example, like, it's like suggesting that preschool teachers or Erzieherinnen and Erzieher should have a university degree doesn't find a public support, actually the majority is against it. But it's not the simple thing that people are just always in favor of something. Actually, I don't even see that as a strong tendency. For example, the Betreuungsgeld is like, it's been asked the other way around. It's just that the majority is against. But I like this idea to see whether we can actually, in some instances, we could actually basically phrase it the other way around. That will be. Because we did some things on methodology that I didn't ask about here, but for example, if you ask them different ways of like sind Sie dafür oder dagegen? Or then ask like, was halten Sie von folgender Aussage? These different types of framing the questions. We actually did some experiments with that and didn't find any significant difference there. That was a bit reassuring. We did things about, let them not going to all these things. We did check a little bit about this parents, non-parents thing, about whether like how exactly you define parents, and I mean, of course, a lot of the people in the control, like in the comparison group, are grandparents, for example. Maybe they care just as much. I don't remember like all the details of that there, but ultimately, I mean, if there would have been first order effects, you should actually basically see it by like parents who have kids in, like, I think we defined it 6 to 18 or not, and we did play around with like choosing like people who have kids in the age group of 0 to 20 something or so, but the results were exactly the same. It might be interesting actually to subdivide this other group interaction with people who don't have any children at all. Those who do. Well, actually, the party position thing is actually something that is interesting, because we actually asked them about the party preferences only at the end of the survey, and it could be affected by the information that you provide. Yeah, that's true. But that is a relevant aspect. But we did ask the party position in a way that hopefully would reduce this issue at least somewhat. So we didn't ask the classical question of whether, like, if you would have to vote next Sunday, what would you vote? But we actually asked explicitly in the way of saying that many people have a long-run preferences for a specific party, even if that sometimes like differs. And then, like, do you have that, and which party would that be? So we actually asked them about long-run like attachment to a party, which also means that like a quarter of people actually say that they are not, like a quarter to a third, that they are not as like aligned with one party in general. But that's an interesting aspect. We will make the data publicly available. It's not yet, but we're still actually trying at least to write a few of the first papers now. But by the end of the project, we aim to make all of this public, where we could talk with GESIS about data archives, because you're much better at that than we are. Now we will definitely make it available a lot of our. We are a bit overrun by time.
We have 3 more minutes. Maybe if you can phrase your questions brief and get the brief response.
Okay, so I've got several questions.
Maybe afterwards.
I'm most interested in. On the second slide, you showed us the returns to skills around the world, and you showed that everywhere it's high returns, but there are also very big differences in the level of effect. So do you have any idea, are there country clusters, and do you have any idea why you find these big differences between the countries? And then the second point is, as far as I can see, it seems that Germans really like more standardization of the educational system. But what about other important aspects of the education system? I mean, I'm thinking about the time point of tracking, because you mentioned research on this topic, or about the freedom of choice concerning the secondary side, because these are also things which are very contested within different federal states.
There's much more in the survey, actually. We did these are good things that we can talk about. So about the different returns in different countries, we did do an analysis of this, and there you do see it's actually not linked to the average level of the skills or the inequality of skills in the different countries, interestingly, but it is related to different institutional structures of the economies that determine how spread earnings are in general or not. So you actually do. So you do see that returns are lower if there's more public sector employment, and 2 more things that I actually that are related to this. These other topics, we did ask about tracking in the first wave, so I didn't talk about this here. So we asked it basically in the way, at which age should kids be subdivided between different school tracks, and they could like basically average grade, and they could just put it in there. And you see like plurality is actually in favor of sticking with after grade 4, but you would actually have, like if you take the individual marks, but you would actually have a majority in favor of age 6 or later. If you combine all these together, you would have a majority there. But not for example, 8 or later, you wouldn't have a majority anymore. We also asked about whether there should be, apart from the gymnasium, whether there should be one or several additional school types, like a 2 or 3 or 4 track system. 2/3 are in favor of more. So people do like this track system. On interesting aspect actually that I find very interesting about choice of secondary school. This year we asked about, but we basically tell them that in some states your average grade determines at the end of primary school on which type of secondary school you go to. In other states, this decision is made by the parents, and then are you in favor or opposed that the school marks determine which secondary school type you can go to? And interestingly, actually, 2/3 are in favor of school marks. Rather, like we told them, like it's either parents or school marks. Majority is in favor of school marks, meaning, I showed you something, for example, people are in favor of parents being allowed to freely choose their primary school, but it's not that they're just always in favor of parental choice. Here it's actually kind of surprising that they are actually against this type of reform that many states are. Actually, we could choose it as number 11 because actually nearly all states by now it's actually parents are free to choose. Actually, preferences seem to be somewhat different.
Final question for Anja then. I hope you're all fine and we just extended a little bit.
I have one question and one remark. First, we had this result with the parents that they differ somewhat between the non-parents, and did you play around with that? Information changes this relationship. Maybe it works, more information might work differently for parents and non-parents. And then one thing, since we have all these posters for the upcoming election around Mannheim, I think your results show pretty clearly that these typical posters with the politician and the meaningless sentence don't really change voter behavior maybe, but they should rather pose some relationships like preschool, I don't know, like children better later on in school, so let's finance preschools or something.
Yeah, I don't know, that would be a tough policy statement that I'm not sure how strongly these type of things that you do within a survey like transform to public discussion, so I would be careful about that. But it does give you some hints about, like, if you see that some information here really have an effect and others don't, you at least get an idea of where to look for if you want to, like, see like that the returns to education or the different earnings of people with university, non-university degree, for example, is something that actually people aren't very aware of and does change opinions on some things. The other point was, right, we did look a lot into like all these things. We didn't find much in terms of differential treatment effects of these information treatments between parents and non-parents. I don't remember all the details, but I think we hardly found any significant differences. And that's actually, we do report all that in the German paper.
Good. Will you be here for a few more minutes maybe for those who want to ask those questions? Okay, great. So I would then otherwise close the public lecture at this stage. Thank you very much for coming again. Thank you so much, Professor Woessmann, for giving this very interesting talk here at GESIS. And final round of applause.